Coming up next, Charlie Blanning is back with a brand new book. It's an exclusive virtual launch of Rags to Riches, his first work of fiction. Stay tuned. Greyhound Nation starts now. This is Greyhound Nation, episode 38, recorded June 25th, 2023. Virtual launch, Charlie Blanning's first novel, Rags to Riches. Greyhound Nation is a podcast for Greyhound enthusiasts produced by Greyhound enthusiasts. To learn more about our show and its hosts, visit our website at greyhoundnation.dog. That's greyhoundnation.dog. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Greyhound Nation podcast. I'm Michael Burns. Now here's your host, John Parker.
Welcome back, Greyhound lovers worldwide. We're here today to do a virtual book launch. Back with us again for the 7th appearance is the Greyhound writer of our time, Charlie Blanning. Welcome, Charlie.
Thanks, John. It's great to be talking to you again.
Well, you've gone and done it again and written another book. So we're gonna talk a little bit about that and how you've made the transition from nonfiction to fiction. We'll talk about that a bit. Tell us a little bit about where the idea for the new novel came from.
Well, I've always wanted to write a novel, and my original idea, and this came when I retired from being keeper of the Greyhound stud book. I thought, really like to write a novel, something about hunting, something about greyhounds, something about coursing. And after rather a long time, because I'm afraid I was actually too busy following the hounds, I did at last have time to settle down and do it. And I had this idea in my head right from the beginning, was that I wanted some characters to go across to Ireland and buy some horses and bring them back to England for hunting. And somehow I'd work a greyhound, into that story. And that's actually exactly what happened, because I got my characters over to Ireland and I thought of a way of getting the greyhound into it. But originally, the horse was the central part of the story, and I boldly typed at the top of chapter 1, "Flying Home," which was to be the name of the horse, and also was going to be the name of the novel. But somehow, as these things happen, the greyhound and its owner, who was a girl called Sam, somehow took over the book. They took it away from me and ran off with it. And so eventually the greyhound became the central animal, if you like, in the story, and the girl became the central character, and the horse and the men who were sort of associated with it, rather got a bit sidelined, but I think it's worked out pretty well.
Our viewers and listeners know, I'm sure, about your history with greyhounds and your work in greyhounds, your history of your family, et cetera, but may not know much about your history with horses. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I was sort of seduced into horses, not by anyone except my wife. Sheila was always, since she was a small girl, she was always obsessed with horses and riding. And when we went up to Cambridgeshire to live, so I could run the Greyhound stud book from its offices in Newmarket, it meant that I had to give up owning and training greyhounds myself. So in a way, I needed a hobby. So I thought, well, this will be a good thing. I'll learn to ride, and something that Sheila and I can do together. So, well, that's what I did. But I have to say, I never realized how difficult it was going to be. Just how difficult it is to learn to ride a horse, particularly if you're middle-aged. I was in my 40s at the time. So, but gradually I became very, very interested in horses and in riding. And my retirement coincided with the cancelling of coursing in my home country, in England. So it meant that when coursing disappeared from my life necessarily, it meant that I could then move across and have an interest in horses and particularly in hunting, because the part of the country we moved to, which was Exmoor, you can hunt on Exmoor 6 days a week, any day a week apart from Sundays. There's always a hunt going out doing something. So that became my big interest. And for quite a number of years, on a daily basis, I was living with horses, exercising horses, looking after horses, and so on.
You developed an interest in that also, I think, from horse racing in the various forms: flat racing, steeplechasing, point to point, and so forth. Tell us a little bit about that.
But I've always been interested in racing. I mean, I come from a family who their major preoccupation was greyhounds, with greyhound coursing and greyhound racing. But my family, if you like, going back through the generations, my grandfather was a great horseman, a great follower of the hounds. He also owned what we call point-to-point horses. Those are sort of steeplechasers. And so I didn't learn to ride as a small boy because we were totally taken up with the greyhounds. I mean, as you know, and everyone who's involved with greyhounds know, it's 24/7. They take up your whole life. So it was only later in life that I had the chance to learn to ride and to enjoy horses as well. So I've been an extremely lucky man.
There's an interesting story of your background that has to do with horses, hunting, and how your grandfather got into kind of made the transition to some extent from fox hunting, stag hunting, etc., to greyhounds. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, my grandfather was always, and we're now talking about the early 1900s. As a young man, he and his brother were both great followers of harriers. Now, harriers are distinct from foxhounds in as far as they're a bit smaller, and of course, as the name implies, they hunt hares, not foxes. And this is the sport that my grandfather enjoyed most, and he and his brother would walk, as the term is, in other words, bring up young puppies for the hunt, and they followed a couple of harrier packs close to where we had our farm and our butter packing business. But unfortunately, the harrier packs weren't doing too well. We're now at the time of the First World War. There's not a great deal of money about. And some great banking people descended from London, and they took over both the harrier packs, which my grandfather used to hunt with, and said, well, we don't want any of this chasing hares. We want to hunt foxes. And so they did. But Grandpa didn't really approve very much of that. And so his interest started to diverge away from hunting towards coursing. And he was fortunate enough that a local landowner and great nobleman was setting up a coursing club in the area, and off they went. And after that, it was greyhounds. Yeah.
I want to switch gears just a little bit and talk about kind of the mechanics of your writing the novel, how you went about it, and so forth. You've one of the things I want to touch on first is you self-published Rags to Riches, which is being done more and more by authors nowadays. It seems to be a little bit easier than it used to be. We all know that books about greyhounds are, of interest to a niche market that most commercial publishers are not particularly interested in because of the numbers of books they can sell. And so if folks want to write about things like greyhounds and coursing, they often have to do it themselves and publish themselves. So how did you go about getting Rags to Riches published?
Well, I'm terribly fortunate in as far as that a great friend of mine called Jeff Hayes is a professional book designer. And those who know my previous books, Jeff designed The Greyhound and the Hare, and also Please Mr., and also our book 22 Waterloo Cups. And many years ago, Jeff and I and Sir Mark Prescott had collaborated on a book about the Waterloo Cup, which is called The Waterloo Cup, the First 150 Years. So I had an expert, at my shoulder. So when we came to publish Rags to Riches, it was quite obvious to me that no orthodox publisher would look at it. We'd also had a small success with our previous books. So it was just a natural thing to do. And as far as the production of the book is concerned, I've been very fortunate because I've just simply had to say to Jeff, he sets them. Of course, now the introduction of word processors and computers makes this sort of thing so much easier than it did in the past when you're typing everything. I just send Jeff the script, he sets it, and he arranges the printing and so on and so forth. So I'm in a possibly unique position, perhaps, and a very fortunate position that I've got a team which helps me achieve what I want to do.
You you have your own fulfillment team there in your wife Sheila. You all do all the taking of the orders, the mailing, and so forth. Why not Amazon? Yeah. Why not use Amazon? Get it put into Kindle, et cetera, et cetera. What are the economics of that transaction?
Well, the economics of Amazon is that it's extremely expensive. We do have a book on Amazon UK, but we don't sell a great number through Amazon. I'm giving away no secrets when I say that eBay is much cheaper, much better, much easier to use as well. So thankfully, as I have a marketing manager in the house, Sheila looks after all that, and we sell direct from our Facebook page and also on eBay, a few on Amazon, but not that many, but simply because Amazon takes too large a slice, I'm afraid.
Now, once you have it ready to go, or let me back up just a little bit. What was your method for writing Rags to Riches? Did you plot out the storyline ahead of time? Did you write from an outline? What was kind of your daily routine of writing?
Well, I had an outline. I thought that was the sort of the way that authors should do it. They sat down and wrote out a skeleton of the plot and so on and so forth, and and even thought in terms of chapters and so on and so forth. And then I sat down to write it, and I threw it all out of the window, and the story ran away with me. That's the best way of putting it. And characters started sort of coming in through the door that I never ever expected them to be there, but all of a sudden there they were on the page, doing things and saying things, and off it went. And eventually, after about 300 pages, it stopped. But no, it's however hard you try and prepare for this and how organized because it's if you like, it's a work of creation, isn't it? So it's as I wrote an author's note for the end of the book, which starts, and I said, this is a fairy story. I made it all up. And yes, I did. And it just somehow came in from outer space and into my head and onto the page, and there it was.
Well, it's a wonderful talent to have, that's for sure. I certainly don't. That's I'm living vicariously through you because I've always thought it would be fun to write a novel like that, but I don't think I've got the creative juices to do that. And that kind of brings me to one thing to point out. You know, all of your writing heretofore has been nonfiction, and I have read other authors that tried to make it from nonfiction to fiction, and they just couldn't quite get it. They had to start with that empty canvas with fiction writing, and whereas with nonfiction, the events have already occurred. If it's a biography or a history of a particular event in history, everything's there. The characters are there. The plot line is there. Everything's happened, and you don't have to create that. You obviously have the ability to do that because, as I've said elsewhere, this is one of the best transitions I've ever read from nonfiction writing to fiction writing. So, to what do you attribute the ability to do that? Is just a kind of a natural talent, or was it this historical background you have in the area where it was set? Well, what do you think?
Well, I'm very lucky in as far as that I've been writing articles for magazines and newspapers about greyhounds, for almost 50 years now. And so, of course, in some of that writing, I've been up against deadlines. At one time, I was the coursing correspondent for the Daily Racing Post, a daily racing paper which still publishes to this day. And I had that wonderful experience of I'd be there at a coursing meeting, and at the end of the the end of the day, originally, I used to have to get in a phone box, get on the phone to the newspaper, and dictate my copy, my description of the day's events down the telephone to the copy taker at the other end. And that's a marvelous discipline. It's a wonderful discipline. You can't afford to be lost for words when they want your copy, and there you are, and you've got the man on the other end of the phone or the girl, and you just got to do it. And I didn't even write it down. You just dictate it. It comes out of your head. So if you've been doing that for a year or two, that's a big help. Yeah. Say, I'm very fortunate in as far as I'm never frightened by the blank page. Somehow there's always been some words to put there. So it's, yeah, I've just been lucky.
You're not afflicted with that great problem of the writer's block?
Well, fortunately, not so far, I have to say. Of course, as you know, I mean, all the books which I've written previously have been factual. So there are the facts, and you simply got to get them down on the page, you hope, in some kind of entertaining way. Fiction, of course, is more difficult because everything is coming straight out of your imagination. But as I say, with this book, Rags to Riches, somehow the characters ran off with the book. And I began to feel very fond of them. I was fond of all the characters, the pleasant ones and some of the unpleasant ones as well. And I just couldn't wait to get to the keyboard and get down in a file what they were going to do next. And most of the time, I didn't know what they were going to do, but somehow they just sort of took the story and off it went.
Now, did you? I was going to say that I found the dialogue to be particularly realistic in terms of believable, what you can imagine these characters saying to each other. Where do you think you came by that ability to have that kind of real, natural dialogue come out of your fingers onto the keyboard?
Well, for a start, I suspect is because, as you would know quite well, John, I never stop talking. It's very difficult to shut me up. So people saying things isn't a difficulty to me. I'm also fortunate in as far as that, apart from writing books, I also do quite a bit of acting as well. So I'm well used to reading and speaking dialogue. So perhaps that helps. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit. We're not going to give anything away in terms of the plot line too much, but just to kind of give a frame to the characters that we're going to talk about here. Give us the general overall storyline?
Well, the major characters are a man called Jack Howard and his friend Arthur Cobb, who have served together during the First World War in the British Air Force at the time, the Royal Flying Corps. The book is set it starts in 1920, and these two men have just returned from flying, of all things, it seems pretty contemporary, flying against the Russian Red Army, because at that time the British were supporting the White Russians, as they were known, against the Red Army in the Russian Civil War. And some characters actually went out and flew on behalf of the White Russians, although they was under the aegis of the Royal Air Force. Anyway, they come back from Russia, they've got nothing to do, they haven't got any money, and this chap Jack Howard says, I think that it might be fun if we signed up. They've read an advertisement in a newspaper of a wealthy businessman. He and his wife want to go hunting, and they want someone to manage the horses and the hunting for them. They don't know very much about it. So Jack, the major figure, during the war, he's ridden in a race in Ireland for a little Irish farmer. And the farmer has always said to him, you'll come back and you'll ride my horses, and we will all win wonderful races, and so on and so forth. And Jack remembers this, and he goes off to Ireland with Arthur to buy horses to for hunting. And while they're there, and they bought the horses, they fall in with someone who they actually think is a small boy who is wandering along the road at night, and the little boy has with him a greyhound, and what has actually happened is the little boy isn't a little boy at all. It's a young girl. She's a 17-year-old girl called Sam, and she has been burned out of her house by the Irish volunteers, and is running away simply to find safety. They all team up together. They all come back to England. They all go and work for this sleazy financier who is known as Sir Buckland Rippers. And they brought with them, of course, the horses, and they bring with them also the little girl's greyhound, who's called Rags. And the story develops from there. I'm giving not too much away if I say they all get mixed up in the Waterloo Cup. They also get mixed up in the Grand National, and these two events provide the climaxes of the story. But there's an awful lot in between. There's some steeplechasing and coursing and hunting and all the best things in life.
And for our greyhound lovers who may not know a lot about horse racing, particularly outside of England, the Grand National is a great steeplechase race. It's kind of the steeplechase race of the year in England, isn't it?
Well, I'd say it's the greatest race in the world, and it still remains enormously popular in England to this day. On Grand National Day, which it's run at a racecourse called Aintree just outside Liverpool, there'll be 250,000 people there, and everyone in the country has a bet. because the Grand National is a steeplechase. It's run over fences, and it's run over fences like nothing on earth in horse racing. It is a unique event, and it means, you know, it's an absolute cavalry charge of 30 to 40 horses, so that no one has the slightest idea really who's going to win. So one has to. It's a great betting event. It's a national betting event. It is the national. If you say the national to any person in England, they know immediately what you mean, even if they don't bet or follow horse racing themselves. It's a huge occasion.
And if to our American listeners and viewers, they may know it from the movie National Velvet, starring Elizabeth Taylor and Mickey Rooney. That was the race that culminated that movie was the Grand National.
Yes, exactly so. Although it appears to be run somewhere in Southern California, as far as I can remember from the countryside. Yes, National Velvet, and a very good film, which I don't know how popular it was in the States, but it was hugely popular in England, called Champion, which was about a man called Bob Champion. He's still alive today, I'm glad to say. Bob Champion was a cancer victim who came back from illness to win the Grand National on a horse called Aldeniti. That's a terrific film as well. Great film. But it's a great race, great occasion.
The Waterloo Cup and the Grand National have a commonality, a historical commonality. Charlie, tell us a little bit about that.
Well, yes, because they were both actually started by the same man, who was William Lynn. He kept the Waterloo Hotel in Liverpool, and he was also the secretary of the races at Aintree, just outside Liverpool at the time. And so he had the unique distinction of, one, inventing the great coursing event, the Waterloo Cup, and also starting the steeplechase, which became known within about 3 or 4 years. It was dubbed this by the racing press of the day, the Grand National. So William Lynn was the creator of both events. And in fact, one time they were run together because in those days, the Waterloo Cup was only run over 2 days, and there was a kind of sort of 3-day carnival organised by Mr. Lynn, mainly, of course, to fill his hotel in Liverpool, the Waterloo. On the first day, you would have coursing. The second day, they had the Grand National. And then the third day, they had the wind-up to the coursing. So it was a kind of, coursing and racing carnival. Eventually, both events got so big that they had to separate them. But their run, the Waterloo Cup running grounds are only 4 or 5 miles away from the racecourse.
And historically, after they kind of separated them in time, how far apart were they run? A week or 2, 10 days? What was could you come and stay for a sporting holiday and take in both events?
Well, it depends how long you could stand it, because the Waterloo Cup eventually settled down over 3 days, normally run in the middle of February, normally before the end of the month. And the Grand National seemed to get sort of later and later until eventually it got into April, which is when it's run now.
Well, that's the plot, and that's the location of some of the climax of the story. Let's talk a little bit about those characters you love. Now, you're familiar with some of them, right?
Yes, some of the characters are based on people who, if I didn't know them, at least feature very strongly in my, the past life of my family. And as the writing of the book progressed, I just simply wrote them in under their actual names, their real names. And when the book was finished, my wife, Sheila, said to me, look, you can't do that because one of the characters is based very much on my grandfather, who was also called Charlie Blanning. And she said, it'll only confuse people. They'll say, who's this bloke, Charlie Blanning? Is it the man who wrote the book? Oh, just too confusing. And in other cases, they're local characters who, because I simply created people out of their original, their original personalities, probably you'd think they're a bit unfair. I'm a bit unfair on some of them, usually simply for comic effect. So we changed their names as well. But rather like the landscape of the book, anyone who knows much about hunting in the county where I live, which is Somerset, or knows about horses and things like this, will know perfectly well who these people are actually based on. I think saying that they're based on those characters is probably the best thing to put it. So yes, they are lightly disguised, although I don't think they're in the position now to come back and haunt me. Most of them are long dead.
Now, I won't give anything away, but readers, I guarantee you will be able to recognize Charlie's grandfather and father once you're into it. The names are changed, but not by a great deal. So that'll be part of the fun of reading the book.
Yes, that's
true.
Some of
them, though, Charlie, you use their real names, one of which was, for example, Lord Sefton, who owned the land over which the Waterloo Cup was run.
Yes, I'm afraid I haven't spared Lord Sefton, because he does appear as a rather comic character. It's only because I bear a sort of historic grudge against the Lord Sefton, because the son of the Lord Sefton who actually appears in the book was once what I felt was unforgivably rude to my father. So I'm just getting my own back, just a little. So Lord Sefton remains. He remains Lord Sefton, and one or two of the other characters also actually existed. There's a famous policeman who appears at one stage, and the major, if there's a villain, if you like, in the book, it's although I think he's also easy to love. It's Sir Buckland Rippers, whom I based on an actual historical character called Horatio Bottomley. He was a famous newspaper proprietor at the turn of the 20th century, and an MP, and also financier, and for some dodgy financial dealings go on in the book, and I lifted that straight out of Horatio Bottomley's story, his life story. He was a very clever man. He, apart from anything else, he founded the Financial Times, which still runs to this day. It's still the city paper in London, but eventually he crossed the line and landed up in jail for a few years. Poor chap.
Well, the Sir Buckland was nouveau riche before it became a popular term, wasn't he?
He was indeed, yes, and of course he brings with him his beautiful wife Daisy, whom I'm very fond of. I have to say, I'm very fond of Daisy. Daisy is a famous musical comedy star from the West End, and she's a major figure in the book. There again, she brings in with her someone who actually existed, who was a man called Oscar Ashe, who was a very famous Australian actor of the period. He created a show called Chu Chin Chow, which for many, many years was the longest running theatrical production of all time. And he made a fortune out of it and threw it all away gambling on greyhounds. Great chap.
Well, what better use of money could there be, right?
Well, absolutely right. It totally ruined him in the end, poor fellow. But I suspect rather like a splendid man whom I've met on occasions. There's a very famous English gambler called Harry Findlay. And Harry has a great saying. He says, "It's not how much money you make that counts, it's how you spend it."
Now you set the ending with the Waterloo Cup in I believe 1921. Is that right?
Yep.
And you took some actual historical data or conditions, etc. Tell us a little bit about that from the actual 1921 Waterloo Cup.
Well, the 1921 Waterloo Cup was pretty sensational all round, and I don't want to mention too many of the things that happened in the 1921 Waterloo Cup, because they do affect what happens in the story is reaching one of its climaxes. So if I was to tell you what went wrong at the 1921 Waterloo Cup, I think it might tell, I hope, my future readers a little too much about what actually goes on.
Yeah.
But it was a pretty sensational occasion, and in real life, funnily enough, the 1921 Waterloo Cup was won by Lord Sefton. I have to tell you, he doesn't win it in the book. Someone else does. But
what about the names of the greyhounds that? The greyhounds that run in there, are they all real, or are they all historical greyhounds?
No, they're real. They're absolutely real, and most of them actually run the courses that you read about in the book. Most of Rags, of course, is a fiction. Rags is a white and black bitch, thus her name, because she's got patches of black. But almost all the other greyhounds which appear in the book really existed, and in fact, another one which stars is this one here, which was my grandfather's famous dog, Sporting Life, and we find a place for him in the book. He has quite a major part to play, but Sporting Life exists. Yeah.
And your grandfather's horse, a retired steeplechaser, he figures in as well. Was that, remind me of the name of that horse?
He was called Sundowner II. And Grandpa
he's in the book, and was that the actual name of the horse?
Yes, it was. His actual name was Sundowner II. What happened was that he was quite a well-known steeplechaser, trained by my grandfather's cousin called Bill Hatt. And like a lot of horses, Sundowner became injured. To use the term, he broke down, and he was given to my grandfather, and Bill Hatt, the trainer, said, "Well, Charlie, if you can get him fit, he's yours. You do what you like with him." And they turned him away, as the phrase is, and they got him sound. And Sundowner came back so that my grandfather could hunt on him, and also ran him in point-to-point races. And the race in which Sundowner runs in the book is exactly the race that he actually won at a particular point-to-point. There again, we changed the name of the hunt. The hunt in the book is called the Nine Barrows Hunt, but anyone who lives within 20 miles of where I live and who goes hunting will know perfectly well which hunt it is.
Yeah, I've said before that in my opinion, it's a book that Julian Fellows of Downton Abbey fame and the English Game and so forth would love, because it's got all the classes. It's got the lords and ladies, it's got the great middle class, and then it's got the kind of working and servant class. Was that intentional, or did you think that that was just a nice way to kind of display the various classes of people in England?
Well, I think it's probably because I'm personally and my family at that particular time, if you like, in the early 1920s, just after the end of the Great War, we sat right in the middle of what you might call English rural society, in as far as that we weren't poor, we had been, but we made money through farming and through butter dealing. And my family at last were able to enjoy things like hunting with harriers and having coursing dogs and so on and so forth. But up above, there was still a very strong hierarchical society. I mean, apart from Lord Sefton, another major aristocrat who figures in the book, but much more sympathetically, he's called Lord Warminster, which is simply a lightly disguised form of a gentleman who was the Marquis of Bath, who actually was well known to both my grandfather and my father, because Lord Bath had a coursing club called the Fruman District Coursing Club, and both my grandfather and my father were chairman of the club, and therefore, although in no way, friends of Lord Bath, they were acquainted with him. He was, and they were very fond of him. He was a lovely man, Lord Bath, a great character. So I was happy to have him in the book, but I just disguised him a little by calling him Lord Warminster, which is a town very close to where his great estate is. And where it is, by the way, to this day, the Lords Bath still exist, and they have a wonderful house called Longleat House. Beautiful estate.
Was coursing held on the grounds of the estate back in the day?
Yes, it was. The coursing took place on all the farms on which it took place. The farmers were tenants of Lord Bath, and Lord Bath owned dogs himself. He was a great supporter. Sadly, in the 1960s, the early 1960s, two decisive things happened in Lord Bath's life. One, he married again, and he wasn't. His second wife wasn't quite so keen on sport as his first wife had been, who was a great character. And he also started a safari park. He went into business with a circus owner called Jimmy Chipperfield, and they fenced off quite a large part of Longleat, the Longleat estate, and let these lions loose. And that was the start of safari parks, which are now extremely popular in this country. That was the first one. Lord Bath invented that.
Interesting.
But, yeah, he was, sadly, he lost interest in greyhounds and became interested in lions instead.
Greyhounds are much nicer to have around than lions, though, So his
yes,
era,
I can't
right?
see I can't see much attraction in lions, I have to say. They just seem to lie about and eat.
One wonders what happened to the hare population when the lions were brought in.
I dread to think. I dread to think. There are lots of hares there in the old days, of course, because Lord Bath and his keepers and the farmers made absolutely sure that they were undisturbed. Yeah. Great days. Great days.
I found all the characters of the book, well, not all of them, most of them, quite likable. To hark back to the Julian Fellows sighting, he talks about his characters, that most of them are good people just doing their best. And I think that describes a lot of the characters. Of course, there are a few that are pure evil, and that's what helps the plot along for sure.
Well, I think probably the most, how can we say, enigmatic character is I have a British intelligence officer who's serving in Ireland. It's the time, I should say, this is 1920, 1921. It's the Irish War of Independence, when the Irish Republican movement was literally fighting the British in the streets and in the countryside for their freedom. And one of the characters which haunts the book almost, and he's an officer. He 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 actually existed. I based him on he's called Captain Harding, and his real name was Captain Jocelyn Hardy, and he was the most extraordinary character. Uh, Irish Republicans to this day keep his memory alive, if you like, only because they loathed him so much. Um, but he was he was an extraordinary character. He served during the Great War, and he was captured very early on in the war in 1914, and then spent the rest of the war trying to get out of prison camps. And I think he escaped 7 times, and the last time he escaped successfully, just in time to get back to the war before it finished. During which he had his leg blown off, and when he had when he had his when he was had his leg blown off, he was heard to shout, "Stop! I'm injured! Stop the war!" Anyway, he survived this experience, and but he had a prosthetic leg, a wooden leg. And the Irish, after the war was over, he was transferred to Dublin Castle, a notorious place in Irish Republican history, where he was a very effective intelligence officer. And the Republicans called him Hoppy. He was called Hoppy Hardy, because they always knew if he was coming, because you could hear the tap, 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 tap of his leg. And this appears in the book as well. But to be fair, if you're being even-handed, yes, he was an extremely dangerous man. He was absolutely ruthless. But then so were the people that he felt that he was obliged to fight. Michael Collins tried to kill him on the notorious Sunday morning, Bloody Sunday, but missed him. He'd just gone out in time before the gunman to execute him appeared at his lodgings. And another time they followed him, of all things, to London, and he lost them at Euston Station. He knew he was being followed, and the gunman who had been sent to assassinate him lost him in the crowd. So he was quite a character. Anyway, he lives again, oddly enough, in Rags to Riches. Yeah.
Well, it's great that you keep that character alive. Let's talk a little bit about the character who's the title of the book, Rags the Greyhound, born in Ireland.
Right.
Yeah. And she was, I believe the dam and sire you cite were actual greyhounds, weren't they?
I made up the name of her dam, but she's by a very famous dog at the time who's called Harmonicon. And Harmonicon was sold to Ireland during the First World War because her owner, his owner, Sir Edward Hulton, who was a great press baron at the time, gave up coursing during the Great War. So his dogs were sold, and a well-known Irish breeder bought Harmonicon and took him back to Ireland to stand at stud, where he was a huge success. You'll find him in every greyhound's pedigree. And anyway, the little girl, Sam, gets Rags, as she calls her, from a local farmer called Mr. O'Sullivan, who I hope people will love as a great character. I love Mr. O'Sullivan. I think he's marvellous. Mr. O'Sullivan gives Sam Rags as a little puppy, as a present, because Sam helps him with his horses. And naturally enough, of course, Mr. O'Sullivan is also the breeder of the great racehorse which they obtain, which is called Flying Home. Yes, Rags, of course, is just a pet. And when they get her to England, they suddenly discover that actually, of course, that she's very well bred and extremely talented. And right, I'm not saying any more about what happens to Rags. But funnily enough, Rags, when I started the book, this is illustrates, if you like, the way that a story runs away with you. Rags was originally a black dog called Danny, and I thought, oh, it doesn't sound quite right. And my sister said to me, I was saying, oh, I'm having trouble with a greyhound's name. And my sister said to me, well, Dad, when he was a little boy, had a lovely dog called Rags. Why don't you call her Rags? So I did. But as she was called Rags, of course, she had to be a white and black bitch because of the name, Rags, Patches, so on and so forth. And then that naturally led, of course, to the proverbial saying, rags to riches. And that's the story, guys. It's rags to riches.
Our listeners will enjoy the fact, I think, that Rags, as you say, was a pet. Young Sam had no idea really what she had. Like Mr. O'Sullivan had told her Rags had a pedigree, I believe the expression was, as long as your arm. And but Sam didn't really appreciate that, what she had. And then the plot develops that Sam sees what a talented greyhound she has in this wonderful pet who was her constant companion, slept with her all the time, etc. And I think that's a wonderful, wonderful way to develop that story. It's the stuff of movies, shall we say. Now, Charlie, one thing I wanted to ask you about, Lord Sefton, in his snobby way, makes a dismissive comment about Rags in the sense of her coloring. Why were, as they called them back then, they called them, I think we take this from the show world, party color now. Back then they called them colored. Why were they disfavored?
Well, the old legend was that a coloured dog, as they were called, that means any dog which is white with patches of black, fawn, or blue. A coloured dog, a white, mainly white greyhound, would frighten the hare away from him or her, so that as the greyhound raced up to the hare, and as one should know, it was the greyhound which reached the hare first in a course which was most likely to win the course, 9 times out of 10, that the hare would be frightened by the appearance of this white dog and would turn away from it, thus favouring the coloured dog's opponent. So the prejudice was you don't want a coloured dog, a white dog, because the hare will turn away from you. It was as one of the characters says, it's absolute nonsense.
Just an old coursing man's myth, I suppose.
Well, it is, but of course, if you look at the greyhounds of the 1800s and also the early 1900s, the vast majority of them are what we would call solid colours. They're either fawn or they're black or they're blue or they're brindled. There were very few famous dogs which were coloured dogs, white and this, white and that. Because people preferred solid coloured dogs. So they bred for them.
And yet we see in medieval times, the white greyhounds seem to be favored for things like coats of arms and paintings and so forth. That's an interesting sort of historical contradiction, isn't it?
Yes, I suppose it's as the level of competition increased, and as the breeding of greyhounds became more and more specialised, but thus you find more solid colours. But it doesn't really signify. I mean, most of the sort of colour thing is an accident, as far as that from the 1980s onwards, there seem to be far more black dogs about than there used to be, which simply caused, in at least in Ireland and in England, because the most popular stud greyhounds were imported Australian dogs who just happened to be black.
Yeah, yeah. You think it had any effect back in the early part of the century, the teens and the 20s, on breeding, this old tale about colored greyhounds being disfavored in coursing?
Um, I don't know. I guess it was simply coincidence. It was just the dogs which won the Waterloo Cup in those days, and of course we're talking about the days before track racing, just happened because of the way they were solid coloured dogs, got mainly solid coloured greyhounds, so that there were very few coloured dogs about. And they're all, I mean, the whole thing about greyhounds, there are all sorts of ludicrous prejudices. I mean, colour, even in my lifetime, brindle dogs were referred to as gypsy dogs. Some people wouldn't have wouldn't have a brindle. Gypsy dogs.
Right.
Give me a good red fawn and a black, etc. But my father always said, and many other people, of course, say it as well. They always say a good dog can't be a bad colour.
That's right. Now, you certainly don't. I won't give anything away by saying you don't leave the reader hanging at the end, but you do leave various paths for these main characters, which leads to the question: will there be a sequel?
Well, will there be a sequel? That rather depends on my public. Because if Rags doesn't provide at least a modicum of riches, there won't be enough money to publish the sequel. I'm giving nothing away, and you're quite right, of course. Yes, I mean most of the characters, even those who some actually disappeared into the English Channel and things like that. It's entirely possible that they may suddenly reappear in a sequel, and I won't be giving anything away by saying that the sequel is already titled. It has a working title, which is The Electric Rabbit.
Well, when you fall in love with the characters and you make your reader do the same, like the characters, and be very fond of them, you just have this natural urge to see what happens next, so to speak.
Well, I hope Rags to Riches gives me the opportunity, yes, to get to the Electric Rabbit. As you can guess from that, Rags to Riches ends in 1921. The Electric Rabbit will be starting somewhere around about 5 years later, with the coming of greyhound racing, and the characters will get involved in that as well, of course, as horse racing and coursing, and so on and so forth, to give hopefully a lively background. But I hope Rags goes well. I had an enormous amount of fun writing it. I hope a lot of people get enormous fun from reading it. And if that's the case, if it goes well, then in November, when the days get shorter and the dark early evenings come, I should be sitting down probably and banging out the next installment of what happens to those characters.
Well, let's have a look at the physical book itself. Would you mind turning around there? It's behind you, and moving it up a little closer, and let's show the viewers what it looks like. It's got two nice paintings. It's a hardback, one on the front and one on the back, and this is a nice book in that it's got the illustration on it, and it doesn't have it's not one of the traditional dust cover jacket type that comes with it. It's right there on the hardback.
Yes, it's when we were thinking about the printing and the publication and everything. I remember that, funnily enough, right at the end of the 19th century, sort of 1890s, that sort of time, this sort of book was very popular. Rather than have a dust jacket, you actually made the hard cover the illustrated part of the book. And I thought that was a nice idea. I always find I get very fed up with dust jackets. The first thing I do when I'm reading a new book is I take the dust jacket off and shove it in a drawer somewhere.
Same
And
here.
we just thought it would be, a nice idea, and that we would try it. And as you say, it is it's a hardback, it's a hardback edition. I think it's a nice book. The paintings are by a very famous painter of animals called Agassiz.
Well, let's talk about how our listeners and viewers get the book. Give us the soup to nuts on that.
Well, as faithful followers of my books will know, I have a Facebook page called The Greyhound and the Hare. And if you go to that Facebook page, The Greyhound and the Hare, you'll find that there's a Shop Now button at the top of it. And you can just click on it, and it will provide you with an order form, which you can fill in, and then we automatically receive it. I have to say, the easiest way for people to buy the book is just simply to email us. And my email address is entirely predictable. It's Charles, all in lowercase, .Blanning @btinternet.com. And if you send us an email and said, I'd like to buy a copy of Rags to Riches, what we will do is immediately email back to you the order form that you could have got from the Facebook page. But that's the easy way to do it. Just email me. I think probably my email address is all over the internet anyway. But apply just email us or press the shop now button on the Facebook page, and we'll get an order form back to you immediately. Yeah, no problem.
Tell us a little bit about the cost, shipping and the book itself.
If you're ordering from the UK, it's £15, and that's with free postage. If you're ordering from Ireland or Europe, I think I'm getting this right, it will be £20. We have to charge you £5 for the postage. And if you're ordering from the States, it will be £25, including the postage. But you don't need to worry about the currency, because when we send you the order form, PayPal, by which you'll be asked to pay, and you can also pay. We have this facility so that even though it's PayPal, you can pay by credit card. It works out everything for you. You don't need to worry about the currency exchange or anything. That's automatically done for you. It's all terribly simple, so I'm told. So my wife tells me. I'm bound to believe her.
How many copies did you have printed?
We had 1,000 printed, so that we hope that if all those went in the near future, I should be extremely pleased. In the past, as some of our faithful readers will know, we've had print runs which have sold out, and people have been disappointed. For instance, when we published 22 Waterloo Cups last year, the books went on sale in August, and by November they'd all gone. And I'm afraid we had to disappoint people who were then looking for a copy. This is one of the problems, of course, of publishing books yourself. You do have to juggle the finances pretty carefully. But there they are. I mean, they're there at the moment. And I hope that lots of people out there will buy the book, but most of all, that they will enjoy the story.
And folks, Charlie's right. They do sell out. Don't be disappointed. It's a wonderful novel, real page turner. You'll love the various plot twists, and the characters themselves will you'll like them, and you'll be amused by several of them. You just about can't go wrong. These books don't come along very often. I've got here a kind of an antique of a book. called The Lady of the Leash. This is the most recent Before Rags to Riches coursing book, written about a coursing greyhound, 1935. So they don't come along very often. Thank you, Charlie, for bringing the literature up to date and creating a very readable book. And I hope it's a great success. One thing I wanted to mention, you're happy to sign the books and provide a dedication in them as well for no additional charge. Is that right?
Yes, we do this with all our books. I'm only too happy to do it. And people will find on the order form an actual space which encourages you, if you like, to do so. I'm always happy to sign a book, always happy, to dedicate it, whether it's to yourself who's actually buying the book, or of course, quite often they're bought as presents, and we're happy to, dedicate the book to the person that you're giving the present. Only too delighted to be able to do it.
I've written a review of the book that will come out shortly for our American listeners for the ASFA Communique, the Lure Coursing Organization's newsletter. So you'll look for that, and we'll be posting that on various Greyhound forums on social media upcoming. So you may want to be on the lookout for that. But it is a wonderful book. You won't regret buying it. And as we say, don't put it off, because you don't want to come out disappointed when all of them have been sold out. So Charlie, thanks again for joining us. Thanks again for writing another wonderful Greyhound book. And all I can say is keep up the good work.
Well, John, it's always a pleasure to talk to you, as you know, and thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to introduce the book to all of you out there listening to Greyhound Nation. Thank you very much indeed.
Greyhound lovers, thanks again for joining us for another episode. I hope you enjoy it, and I hope you'll enjoy the book. We'll see you again next time here on the Greyhound Nation.
Thanks so much for listening to the show. If you're not a regular listener, be sure to follow Greyhound Nation wherever you get your podcasts. We're also on social media, Facebook and Instagram. Just search for Grey Nation Show, follow us, and you'll get notifications every time we release a new episode. You can also get new show notifications when you subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you liked the episode, leave us a review on our Facebook page or your favorite podcast app. We'd love to hear from you. You can also send us feedback or questions via the contact form on our website at greyhoundnation.dog. That's greyhoundnation.dog. This episode was produced in collaboration with host John Parker. Our theme music was composed and performed by Dimitri Taras. Thanks to our guest, Charlie Blanning, for joining us to talk about his first novel. Those 1,000 copies are on sale now. To order your own copy and learn more about Charlie's writings, search for The Greyhound and the Hare on Facebook. A link to his Facebook page is also available in the show notes. I'm Michael Burns, and you've been listening to Greyhound Nation.